Welcome back to the ACIM Book Club. This is part 1 of our commentary on the notes on sex found in Helen's original notes. In this video, we'll review the notes from Principle 43. I'm Alison Anton with the Forgive Nest podcast for A Course in Miracles. But before we jump in, let's make sure we start off with intention and focus. I'll have you close your eyes so we can ask Jesus to guide us. Take a deep breath. Help me unroot all shallow roots in my mind today. And you can open your eyes. So I want to start out by acknowledging that in present time, we've gone through 46 principles so far versus the first time we read through the first sex notes in Principle 18, which at that point was only the third reading day. We didn't really have nearly as broad of a perspective then as we do now. We now have a bigger picture of what Jesus envisions for us, especially after yesterday's reading in Principle 46, where we got to see the vertical chain that leads all the way back to God. It's clear to us now that miracles are to right our path in the direction of God. A big theme we've seen in these later principles, and that he's led up to from the earlier ones, is the importance of seeing the holiness in others and how seeing this way leads us to behave appropriately toward them. Another important thing we've heard so far in the principles is to use our time and our bodies constructively. And it's clear the word constructive to Jesus is using it to dedicate our lives to seeing the inherent holiness within everything we think we see here. So let's try to keep that bigger picture in mind because Jesus's discourse on sex and special relationships are an important aspect of that. He's inviting us to look closely at our current motivations for relating. So in Principle 43, he starts the sex discussion in paragraph 5 about how our unconscious mind is filled with distortions that block miracle impulses. Let's think back to our mind sandwich that we talked about from Principle 28, where he discussed that the subconscious mind has 2 levels to it. There's a deep level where our natural impulses are to give miracles to others. But on top of that is a superficial level, which is open and left to our own devices, which tend to get filled with worldly and body level impulses that block miracles. He's reiterating that same concept here regarding sex. He says, you are involved with unconscious distortions, which are producing a dense cover over miracle impulses, making it hard for them to reach consciousness. What's important to understand is that we're faced with 2 modes of relating here. Relating with the other person as a body, i.e., sex impulses, or relating with the person as a spirit, i.e., miracle impulses. He says at the end of this paragraph, relating is a way of achieving an outcome. Let's stay with that for a minute, because it's as if he's saying we use our relating to get a result. His real question is, what outcome do we want? This section is an introduction to an esoteric question that he invites us to answer for ourselves throughout the entire course. What outcome do we really want? Do we want to stay in an illusion, or do we want to return to what's real? Because he's saying here that how we choose to relate to others is a way of achieving that ultimate desired outcome. We can get a sense of a cyclical action forming in the subconscious mind here. If the outcome I want is to stay in the illusion, I'll choose to fill my subconscious mind with body level identification, as we'll talk about in a second, and ideas that go with that, like sexual attraction. That identification to the body naturally pulls me toward relating to people in that way, and it loops me there. And in turn, it blocks my miracle impulses from coming through. We can see how trapping the miracle impulses down also would preclude us from movement out of the loop that's happening in the upper subconscious mind. As we've learned from previous principles, we need that miracle flow. So the impulse for sex is that oh so perfect way to seal the deal on keeping miracle impulses from rising to the conscious mind. Then he goes on in paragraph 6 that essentially staying stuck in sexual impulses is an expression of an indiscriminate attempt to reach communion through the body. This involves not only improper self-identification, but also disrespect for the individuality of others. I imagine myself, again, stuck in the superficial part of my unconscious, trying desperately to relate to something real or commune with something. But all I can identify with is the improper self-identification, which is my body. That's not real communion. And that attempt leads to disrespect of the partner I'm with, or as he alludes to in a minute, fantasies that play out in my mind. There's a lot to think about here. Sex is such a big focus of human life. It's all very normal. But clearly he's trying to point a picture, giving us depth of field that goes well beyond our current myopic view of sex. And he continues by saying, all shallow roots have to be uprooted because they are not deep enough to sustain you. These shallow roots are the distortions we plant in our superficial subconscious that block our miracle impulses. These are the annuals, so to speak, that we plant in the spring to give us color throughout the summer, but they don't last. And we have to keep planting them again and again because there's no taproot at all to the deep subconscious where miracles originate. He's saying we need to work to pull these out, and in my analogy, stop replanting them. This entire conversation from paragraph 7 on is a really interesting one and worth the time to pick apart. I suggest you do that. If we really put our thinking caps on and stay with it a while, we can start to see the big picture that these distortions have flipped us upside down in the same way that he said in Principle 35 that we flipped around the golden rule. The distortions in our subconscious are working hard, very hard, to keep us feeling stable or giving us the illusion that we're stable in this upside down, distorted view of ourselves. But he counters that by saying, anything that holds it that way is hardly conducive to greater stability. Let's scroll to paragraph 10, where he brings up fantasies and projection. He uses an example of an artist obsessed with sharpening his pencils, but never creating anything with them. He says, the sexual language here of pencils is intentional. Sex is often utilized on behalf of similar errors. Hostility, triumph, vengeance, self-debasement, and all sorts of expressions of the lack of love are often very clearly seen in the accompanying fantasies. Again, we can see how we're just running an unconstructive, distortive view through our mind and then projecting it through fantasy onto others. A side note here is that unconstructive to Jesus really is another word for destructive. Later we learned there are no idle thoughts. So even the fantasies we play out in our minds but never act on outwardly are actually not as benign as we thought they were. He brings up here at the end of this paragraph that just because such fantasies are frequent, and we could say typical, it doesn't make them accurate. You can be wholly reliable and entirely wrong, he says. And he concludes this discourse in paragraph 12 with something I think all serious course students need to take in deeply. He says, the confusion of miracle impulse with sexual impulse is a major source of perceptual distortion. I think we need to not only read that line, but we really need to hear that line. Let's say that again. The confusion of miracle impulse with sexual impulse is a major source of perceptual distortion. That's a big statement considering the entire course is to help us right this perceptual distortion. He continues that the distortion induces rather than straightens out the basic level confusion, which underlines all those who seek happiness with the instruments of the world. So we're coming around again to that if we're all walking around misinterpreting miracle impulses for sexual impulses, and we know that sexual impulses induce a misordered perception, it's going to be impossible to right that perception. Because if miracle impulses are blocked, we'll never be able to act upon them. Remember in Principle 20, he says at the end, in this phase of learning, working miracles is more valuable. Miracles are the essential course of action for everyone. Essentially, miracles are the purification we need to right the upside-down perception. We're getting a clear indication from Jesus that sex impulses are a major contributor to the illusion that the body and not the spirit is our identity. And that's the upside-down perception we're looking at righting. So there's more on our mix-up of miracle impulses with sex impulses in the sex talk from Principle 48 next week. So stay tuned for that. For now, let's end this session here, but we'll take another important minute to close with our practice statement again. And I'm also going to share a passage from later in a section called Relationships Without Limits in chapter 15 that goes hand in hand with the need to uproot all shallow roots that don't serve our highest purpose of giving miracles. Close your eyes. And take a nice deep breath. I'll read the passage first, and then I'll have you repeat the practice statement after. When the body ceases to attract you, and when you place no value on it as a means of getting anything, then there will be no interference in communication, and your thoughts will be as free as God's. Now repeat this as if you're asking Jesus directly. Help me uproot all shallow roots in my mind today. And with that, you can open your eyes, and we'll pick up where we left off in tomorrow's review of the notes on sex from Principle 46, and a review of the notes from Principle 18 as well. I'm Alison Anton with the Forgive Nest podcast for A Course in Miracles. It was great talking to you.